Hollywood is saturated with horror films. Most have sadly become parodies, cheap thrills, and jump scares. An easy way for executives to provide viewers with grotesque and gruesome imagery to fill their pockets with easy cash. However, every once in a while, a film comes out that revitalizes the genre and is able to explore the darker side of the human condition. One of these gems was Robert Eggers' The Witch. It's an enthralling story about faith, family, temptation, and desolation. Besides the magnificent ambience and the superb acting, this film manages to bring into light ancient folktales that have shaped our modern notion of witchcraft. While most reviewers claim that this film is a celebration of the sexual liberation of the feminist movement, I completely disagree. This powerful piece of cinema depicts the descent into darkness of the gentler sex. The majority of other YouTubers focus on the Salem witch trials when they give their interpretation of this film, which is completely reasonable. But I'd like to delve deeper into the first conception of the word witch and how it shaped this film. Although the etymology of the term witch is highly debated among scholars, due to the fact that its origins are somewhat obscure, it seems to be a consensus that the genesis of this term had a rather positive connotation. A very peculiar possible origin that stood out to me was a term based in ancient Germanic, which is Wicca, that roughly translates to watch or to stay awake, meaning that essentially the predecessor of the word witch meant something like guardian. A silent observer of the night, whose duty was to observe and interpret the language of the gods through the stars, but most importantly, to keep the sacred fire of the village alive, to protect the villagers from all evils and predators. If you ask for my opinion, the previous usage of the word was very beautiful, almost poetic. Nevertheless, as the centuries went by, and different languages began to dominate and develop, this benign word was corrupted and morphed into something much more sinister. It wasn't until the European Renaissance in the mid-15th and 16th century that the modern portrayal of witches began to take hold on the collective minds of the people. We all have heard about the European Renaissance, where beauty and prosperity was awakened after an age of warfare and death in the continent. It was the rebirth of ancient principles and ideologies inspired by the Greek philosophers that came before. It was the rebirth of faith, a time where the European populace found solace in the holy texts. And most importantly, the economic boom of this era brought great creative minds that were able to bring divinity in earth through their works. The people of this magnificent era of history also were able to understand the causes that brought Europe to the Dark Ages, and that was the corruption of the human spirit. It was believed that due to the breakdown of strict moral codes and the perversion of sacred texts, that the continent fell into a trap of decay and constant warfare that only brought rage and misery to everyone. That is why a great deal of Renaissance paintings depict demonic entities tempting humans to sin. Which brings us to this painting from the 1500s titled Witch Riding Backwards on Goat by Albrecht Dürer. This painting is believed to be the first depiction of the modern witch. First, note the black goat. Seem familiar? Well, a black goat, as many of you may know, is the representation of Satan himself, but to be more accurate, it actually represents one of the many minions of the devil, Baphomet. The old woman, as you can see, has a staff in one arm and the horn of the goat in another, and in the top left corner there are droplets of rain. This is because witches were believed to control the weather, usually blamed for causing heavy storms and droughts. The fact that she's riding backwards suggests that she isn't in control. The goat, or Baphomet, is the one directing her. and she is in a reactionary state rather than a commanding one. The reason for this strange writing position was because Baphomet is believed to have the ability to seduce and remove free will from its victims, essentially making them slaves of its will. And then, at the bottom, we have the cherubs, who seem to be planting spears on the ground, and one of them is holding a tree plant and the other one a round object, which could represent the planet itself. This could be because they represent the foundation of the next generation and they will inherit the planet and everything in it. And because of the chaos that the goat and the witch are bringing, their future will be tumultuous and filled with struggle as they precariously hold the very world in their hands. There is another great piece of art by the Italian artist named Marcantonio Raimondi and Agostino Veneziano, who created this masterpiece in the year 1523 titled Lo Stregozzo, which translates to the witch. As you can see, there are plenty of similarities between this and the previous picture. First, the center of the piece features an old decrepit naked woman commanding a chariot made out of a carcass. She is being carried by 4 young men and they seem to be passing through a forest disturbing the local animals. Notice how there are also several black goats in various states of decay. There are also 4 babies right in front of her and she is grabbing one of them by its tiny head, its most vulnerable part, suggesting that she meant to harm it in one way or another. This engraving is so complex that I could dedicate an entire video just trying to take it apart. But for the sake of the video, let's just focus on these specific parts. What could all of this mean? Well, in my humble opinion, I think that this witch represents the stereotypical evil mother. There is an older gentleman cowering right under her as the satanic chariot is passing through, which makes me believe that this is some form of twisted family unit. The witch is obviously hungry for power, as she's literally slaving away these young men in order to cause major destruction in nature. Which I find weird because women throughout history have been associated with the creation of nature. They literally determine life and they choose the next generation by selecting their mates. Here is a picture of Mother Gaia, the goddess of the earth, protector of nature and the earth itself. Notice the difference between this picture and the last one? In this one, Mother Nature is a young, beautiful woman who's fertile and her purity is spreading throughout the realm, while the witch is ugly and bitter and she is destroying everything the younger and more beautiful Mother Gaia has built. Beauty is power, and power corrupts. Women in their youth have a tremendous amount of power that is almost impossible to conceive by the vast majority of men. But once beauty is gone, women lose this power asset, and if they're vain and corrupted to the core, they will punish their very own children in order to regain the sense of power they once had. Due to the heavy influence by Christianity and Catholicism, it was heavily believed in Western nations that the matriarch of the household was sacred and that questioning her actions and sacrifices was in itself a major sin. Even worse, to doubt your love and devotion to your mother, no matter how sadistic she may be, was shunned by the entire community. That is why this is one of my personal favorite pieces of art. This is a warning for the society and women as a whole about the dangers of their darker self. This final drawing by Francisco Goya, titled Los Caprichos, which roughly translates to The Envy, depicts an older witch in her broomstick teaching a much younger woman how to fly. This piece is very plain and simple, but all of these 3 pieces of art have one single motif in common: older, envious, bitter, and corrupted women corroding and preying on the next generation to fulfill their sadistic egos. Which brings us to the film. This dynamic can be clearly seen as the relationship between the mother Catherine and her teenage daughter Thomasin slowly begins to collapse. Though the main driver of their animosity is the disappearance of baby Sam, there are subtle undertones that suggest that Thomasin's mother is jealous of her newfound beauty, as she suggests to her father in several occasions to sell her to another family. This film, if anything, makes it very clear that the failure of the family was due to evil forces outside their control. In the very first few minutes, we see baby Sam be crushed into a paste by the demonic witch, and the two younger twins are possessed by the influence of Black Phillip. Caleb is also tempted by one of the witches, and as a result, he has a slow and painful death. Catherine is tricked into insanity as these evil forces uses her grief against her, while the dad is crushed by his own work as Black Phillip leads him to his grave. It is only when mother and daughter are left alone that we see the rage of Catherine towards Thomasin. This was heartbreaking for me, as Catherine is punching and trying to choke her daughter to death. Thomasin keeps begging her to stop and tells her that she loves her, but at the end, she was forced to kill her own mother, leaving her completely alone and devastated. Thomasin was completely vulnerable and at the brink of starvation when she decides to try to speak to the goat. As soon as she signs the book, she's tricked and loses her free will. This scene where Baphomet asks her to remove her clothing was extremely disturbing, as you can hear the excitement in his voice. And when she joins the rest of the coven, she's naked and defenseless, losing everything she held dear in exchange for a meager taste of butter. It is clear at the end that this was all planned by Baphomet himself. The demon wanted her and her alone, because of her youth and beauty. It took years, but little by little, Baphomet was able to ruin her family one by one, until he was able to claim his prize and condemn her to a life of depravity and meaninglessness. This is why I love this film. While there is constant propaganda in most films about the perfection and the inability of women to be corrupted, there are a few brave directors who say no. Women have the capability of evil that can destroy the foundations of our very nature. This film also brings forward a very taboo subject of predation of powerful magnates to young women who do not have a stable familial circle. Hollywood has been exposed to its major problem with sexual predation. Hundreds of brave men and women have spoken out about their horrible experiences. And I believe that a major cause of the rampant sexual abuse is destruction of the familial bonds by politicians, Hollywood posers, and thousands of activists whose sole purpose is to gain power at whatever means necessary. Perhaps this may seem a little controversial, but women aren't great. Some women are great, but that greatness can only be manifested itself if they can recognize their own darkness. Hey, this is Andrew from Cultural Curfew. Just wanted to thank all my new subscribers. To any new viewers, if you like what you saw, please consider subscribing. As you know, YouTube has implemented a new policy and I've lost lots of tools and support until I reach 1000 subscribers. So please, if you like what I'm doing, hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to check out my channel for other videos like this. Have a wonderful day. Peace out.